George Russell, a supremely talented Formula One driver who just happened to find himself in the right place at the wrong time. But with a contract end lurking at the end of this season and Toto Wolff eyeing up his options for the regulation change, 2025 could be his most important season yet. There are three main factors that will decide whether or not this season is a success for George Russell. Part 1. Top dog. George is now entering his fourth season at the Silver Arrows, and I think if you'd have asked him before he joined the team how many wins he would have at this point in his career, he definitely would have said more than 3. If the team had decided a little bit earlier that they wanted to swap Bottas out with George, then he definitely would have a fair few more than 3. But of course they wanted to keep that harmonious 1-2 dynamic with Hamilton and Bottas at that team. And they wanted to keep that for as long as feasibly possible, which meant that George just kind of had to stay at that struggling Williams. And now with Mercedes continuing on this current trajectory that they find themselves on the worst run that they've been on in this turbo hybrid era, he finds himself as the de facto team leader with Lewis Hamilton leaving to Ferrari. So, can he step up to the plate? Can he fill these massive boots and become the consistent point scorer that Mercedes will need him to be in 2025? If you look at 2023 George Russell, you'd almost certainly say no, with him finishing 8th in the championship on 175 points, whereas Lewis Hamilton was in 3rd in the championship on 234 points. And he was only behind the dominant Red Bulls of the 2023 season. However, if you look at 2024 George Russell, you'd almost definitely say yes. With him outperforming Lewis throughout the 2024 season and almost being unlucky to not be further in front of him in the championship, he probably can lead that team with just a little bit of extra pace from weekend to weekend that you kind of expect him to be able to develop with the sort of natural development of his career at this stage. Obviously, Lewis Hamilton is going to be one of the hardest drivers to replace in Formula One history. If you look at what Lewis and Mercedes achieved in their time together, it's statistically the best partnership in F1 history. It's a tough act to follow. And if George were to not succeed in the 2025 season, if he doesn't step up to the plate, then he's in a bit of a tough spot with the sort of names that are being chucked around that Mercedes seat going forward. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, his contract is up at the end of 2025, meaning that the options are open for Mercedes. He's effectively got this season to prove himself, otherwise he could be out. And I know that sounds very dramatic, but if he were to not succeed this season at Mercedes, then his career could end up looking a lot like Daniel Ricciardo's. And I know that bringing up Daniel Ricciardo here seems a bit random, but oh look, there's a little rabbit hole over there. Why don't we go and have a little look? Hello, make yourself at home. I know it's a little bit cramped in here, but welcome to my rabbit hole, where today we are discussing the similarities between Daniel Ricciardo's career and George Russell's career. Exhibit A joins a team that have won the last 4 Constructors' Championships. Tick. Exhibit B joins that team alongside a driver that has won at least 4 Drivers' Championships and is currently in their prime. Tick. Exhibit C. That team that he joins immediately flops in the new regulation change, and he doesn't get that seemingly obvious title chance that looked on the horizon. Tick. Exhibit D. He beats his more experienced teammate over the course of that first season that they are together. Tick. Exhibit E. His teammate leaves to join Ferrari. Tick. Exhibit F. He is placed alongside a hotshot driver who looks to be the next generational talent in Formula One. Tick. I mean, the confirmation bias is definitely strong, but I certainly see a lot of similarities. Speaking of that generational talent that's going to be driving alongside George in 2025, Part 2, the Challenger. Andrea Kimi Antonelli steps into Formula One almost as Toto Wolff's revenge for not being able to sign Max Verstappen when he wanted to back in the day, at least in his words, because he had both Lewis Hamilton and Nico Rosberg at the team at the time, and there was no space for Max Verstappen to join. He has won absolutely everything on his rise to Formula One other than his Formula 2 season last year. And to be fair, we have seen underwhelming Formula 2 performance translating into very solid Formula 1 performance. I mean, if you look at Ollie Behrman's Formula 2 season last year, he didn't have a great time. However, he managed to step up to the plate in Formula 1 last year with his performances in Saudi Arabia replacing Carlos Sainz, and then for Haas in Baku getting points on his debut with that team, earning himself a place on the grid for 2025. Another driver similar to this with a poorer F2 season last year is Franco Colapinto, and we all know about how he had such a successful 2024 towards the end, at least before he started crashing. He only finished 9th in the championship last year. Obviously he didn't compete towards the end of the season, he possibly would have come around 6th, but you would say that that's possibly not an amazing Formula 2 performance. And these performances towards the end of the season with Williams have meant that Alpine have gone out of their way and a significant amount out of their pocket to get him to be their reserve driver going forward, and it looks as though he might be replacing Jack Doohan as early as the 6th race of 2025. So this is all to say that Formula 2 performance isn't necessarily a massive indicator of how someone is to be in Formula 1. And that's also not to say that Antonelli has had a particularly poor Formula 2 season. I mean, stepping into that championship for the very first time and to come away as 6th place, it's not horrible. I mean, he outperformed both of the two aforementioned rookies in the 2024 F2 season, and he just happens to be younger than both of those drivers. He's essentially coming into the 2025 season as Mercedes and as Toto Wolff's new golden boy. He's sort of got nothing to lose. Yes, he's got a big reputation to live up to, but no one's really expecting him to outperform George this season, and definitely not over the course of the full 24 races. And if George isn't comprehensively beating a rookie, then it looks pretty bad on him. It's essentially a lose-lose all round for George. He either gets beaten by Antonelli over the course of the season, which would be a horrible look, or he beats Antonelli and everyone's like, of course he would because he's a rookie. Part 3. The champion. Toto Wolff has been openly flirting with the idea of signing Max Verstappen to Mercedes ever since it was announced that Lewis Hamilton would be leaving the team. And I mean, at the end of the day, who can blame him? The only man that can truly replace the likes of Lewis Hamilton in Formula 1 right now is Max Verstappen. In terms of commercially, no one can really touch Lewis Hamilton right now with the pull that he has inside the Formula 1 circle and outside. It's tough to match. However, Max is the closest option that you've got to that in the current pool of drivers. He obviously has an immense amount of fans, the Orange Army that turn up through thick and thin to every single race throughout the season. I'm sure that Toto Wolff's 33% shareholder status at Mercedes wouldn't mind selling some merchandise to those fans. But also, and let's be honest here, the most important thing is pace in Formula 1, and Max Verstappen is certainly the man to fill the boots of Lewis Hamilton at Mercedes currently. He's been the best driver on the grid across the last 4 seasons, bar none, in Formula 1. So why wouldn't Toto Wolff want to stir the pot a little and try and unsettle Max at Red Bull, try and bring him across to Mercedes? But in doing so, if you're George Russell in all this, surely you're feeling a little bit betrayed about the way that Toto is so openly and so publicly trying to get Max Verstappen to come across. I mean, George is the man that would likely get replaced in this scenario. George and Max, quite frankly, do not get on. We saw that clearly towards the end of the 2024 season with the little spat that they had around the penalty that Max got in Qatar and the way that George was pushing so heavily for him to get it. I mean, we've seen teammates in the past in Formula 1 who don't get on and who we publicly know don't get on, and it only really works in the scenarios where the car is so dominant that if they're taking points off each other by crashing into each other or battling too hard, then it doesn't overly matter. Like we saw with Nico Rosberg and Lewis Hamilton in the past at Mercedes, because they were so far in front, it didn't matter so much that they were kind of hating each other inside the garage. But of course, Mercedes in their current situation don't exactly have that luxury. So George must be feeling a little bit threatened that the team that signed him from so young would consider letting him go after all he's been through with them. Like coming into Formula One, coming off the back of being the F2 champion, just to drive around at the back for a Williams team that struggled through 3 seasons with him and barely scored any points. All whilst Mercedes slowly decided whether or not they wanted to keep on Bottas for another year and another year on 1-year contracts. To then join Mercedes at the exact moment that they start going backwards after 8 consecutive Constructors' Championship wins. To then go toe-to-toe with Lewis Hamilton, one of the greatest drivers of all time, over the full 3 seasons that they had together at Mercedes, and that still not be enough for them. That's got to hurt George a hell of a lot. However, in Max most certainly, and in Kimi potentially in the future, we have 2 of the best of the best of the best generational talents that we might ever see in Formula One, and George basically has this year to prove that he's one of them.